I'm Ben, and this is Bob from Mad Science of Minnesota. We're here today with Dr. Michio Kaku, author of Physics of the Future, the latest in a string of amazing physics books that he's put out. And we're here today to talk to him about what life might be like 100 years or so from now, and also to get his view on some general science things. We'll try very hard to stump him. So, Bob, if you want to take the first question.
Okay. Well, I'm a chemist, so I'm interested in the battery. It is one of the weak points in the mobile electrical systems that exist today, and whether it's cell phones, computers, or automobiles. And I'd heard that there was a iron 7 form that was being worked with as a potential battery. And I was wondering where things stand in this area.
Well, you are exactly right. It turns out that the lack of a battery is one of the reasons why we don't have a portable jetpack, we don't have our flying cars, and why we really don't have that many electric cars on the road. Over 100 years ago, Edison and Henry Ford were good friends, and they had a friendly bet. What power source would drive automobiles of the future? Edison thought it would be batteries. Henry Ford said, no, it's going to be gasoline. Well, let's be blunt about this. Pound for pound, kilogram for kilogram, gasoline has more joules of energy than a car battery. Remember that gasoline is concentrated sunlight. Sunlight, in some sense, concentrated since the time of the dinosaurs. So gasoline is really power-packed, while batteries are still lacking. Now, in terms of the next generation, many physicists are looking at nanobatteries, using nanotechnology, which can store enormous amounts of energy. Think of a substance called graphene. Graphene is one layer thick of carbon atoms. It is so strong, it is the strongest material known to science. If I take an elephant, put an elephant on a pencil, and balance the pencil on a little bit of graphene, graphene will not tear and will actually hold up the elephant. Now, if I start to stack layer upon layer of graphene, then I can begin to create a nanobattery or a nanocapacitor, tremendous amounts of energy stored in one place. And so that's where we might be able to make a leap forward, because a portable power pack is the problem. Think of a jetpack. You realize that the Nazis during World War II helped to perfect the jetpack so that Nazi soldiers can go across rivers that have bridges that were blown out by the Allies. The problem is the jetpack only operates with hydrogen peroxide for just a few minutes. And then you're left hanging in the air with no energy whatsoever. So yes, batteries are the main weak link in this chain, and we hope that nano batteries may pick up the slack, but again, it may take a few decades to perfect that.
Well, I've heard that we could use insects as a way of attacking enemies in wars. How would we go about training these insects to do what we want done?
Well, it turns out that there's something called optogenetics. That is, it's possible to breed fruit flies and different kinds of insects such that neural pathways, individual neural pathways, light up like a Christmas tree. And as a consequence, it's possible to stimulate certain very simple neural pathways like the escape mechanism. So believe it or not, it's possible to build a laser, shine it on an insect like a fruit fly, and it will automatically take off on cue. Now, when the story of optogenetics hit the press, you can imagine that comics had a field day. In fact, on the Jay Leno show, Jay Leno imagined that you push a button and then a fly goes into George Bush's mouth. Well, believe it or not, the military has looked into this, but we are a long ways to go before we can get smart flies and smart bugs to do our bidding. We're only talking about some very simple neural pathways, pathways of eating, pathways of escape, but more complicated organisms like dogs or cats it'd be extremely difficult, even using optogenetics, to trace the neural pathways of specific kinds of behaviors. So this is still in its infancy. So don't think that we're going to be able to train gigantic waves of bees anytime soon.
Killer bees would be a lot better than fruit flies. What about rail guns? 20, 25 years ago, there was quite a bit of interest in rail guns, and I saw this as having a potential of shooting extremely rapid projectiles. Is this work still continuing?
Yes, but on a much lower level. You are absolutely correct. In Popular Mechanics magazines and other popular magazines, about 20 years ago, it was quite a sensation being able to launch from rest a projectile that would go into orbit. Forget about booster rockets. Forget about Cape Kennedy. Forget about all these gigantic rockets. You would have a portable device you could put in a living room, and from your living room, shoot a projectile at 18,000 miles per hour and have it go into orbit around the Earth. Well, that's the good news. The bad news is the payload would be flattened because of the impact on the air. Air friction, believe it or not, air hitting the projectile at 18,000 miles an hour is enough to flatten steel. As a consequence, the military has looked into this as a form of Star Wars in outer space. In outer space, there is no air friction, and some people have thought about creating what are called smart nails. That is, getting a railgun that shoots nails at the enemy satellite or the enemy bomb, wiping it out with a railgun. So once again, railguns exist. High school kids play with them. You can see science fair projects at high schools where people build miniature railguns. The problem is, among other things, air friction, which flattens the payload, so you have to go into outer space. And at that point, some people are thinking that maybe even nails or pellets would be enough to wipe out enemy satellites or enemy rockets. So that's the reason why research in railguns didn't take off so much, but that's why research in cruise missiles did take off. Cruise missiles travel very slowly, some of them subsonic, in fact, below the speed of sound. But because they're intelligent, they can see the terrain and drop a bomb right between the goalposts of a football field from a distance of 500 miles. So the cruise missile became the weapon of choice rather than the railgun.
Do you see railguns, if they were put in space, as a viable way of launching long-distance satellites or someday perhaps even space capsules to explore farther and faster than conventional rocket fuel can take us?
Well, in principle, however, you have a problem, and that is Newton's third law of motion. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. On Earth, if I get a shotgun and I fire the shotgun drives back on your shoulder and will actually give you recoil. So there are going to be recoils of these things in outer space. Now, NASA has looked at a different kind of projectile, and that is the plasma ion engine. Ion engines are not very spectacular. They're like the tortoise compared to the hare. However, if the hare is a booster rocket, it only lasts maybe 4 or 5 minutes, and then kaput. It's like the hare, it runs out of steam. The tortoise is the ion engine, releasing a steady stream of ions for years at a time. It's not spectacular. You put an ion engine on a tabletop and it does nothing. In outer space, it does pick up energy over several years. However, the plasma ion engine does shoot out a tremendous blast of ions, and some people have thought about using the plasma engine to go to Mars. It can actually cut down the flight time to go to Mars from maybe a year down to maybe 3 months. And that could save time because in outer space, our astronauts would be hit with lots of radiation in outer space. In fact, just going across from New York City to Los Angeles, you get a dental x-ray of radiation, a few millirems per hour, every time you fly from New York City to Los Angeles. And so that's why we want to cut down the time it takes to go from Earth to Mars.
You talked about Moore's law in your book. Is it starting to disappear? Will it be replaced by something else?
Yes, Moore's law says the computer power doubles every 18 months, and you can set your watch by it. It's a mathematical formula when you plot it on a curve. Because of Moore's law, when you get a greeting card in the mail that says happy birthday to you, there's a chip in that card with more computer power than all the Allied forces of 1945. Hitler, Eisenhower, Churchill would have killed to get that chip. And what do you do with it? You throw it away in the garbage. But all things must pass. Eventually, the heat generated by a transistor becomes so much, and you get leakage because of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. You don't know where the electron is anymore because the transistor is maybe 5 atoms across. Your Pentium chip today has a layer about 20 atoms across at the minimum. But in 10 years' time, it'll be 5 atoms across. At that point, the electron can leak out and Moore's law collapses. In fact, I spoke in Switzerland and met the physicists at IBM IBM Zurich, and they told me that they can already see it. It's already happening. Just last week in the New York Times, it was announced that Intel is thinking about going into the 3rd dimension. Instead of making chips that are flat, making chips that are stacked and 3-dimensional, because they're bumping up now against the end of Moore's law. Silicon Valley could become a rust belt, because would you buy an upgrade? Would you buy a new computer game knowing that it's exactly the same in terms of power as last year's model? Maybe not. And that could start a recession in the computer business unless we physicists find a replacement for silicon.
Along that same lines, I think maybe even in the same chapter of the book, you talk about miniaturizing transistors and computer chips to the point where you could, in theory, have a computing device so small that you could put it on a contact lens that could then, you could see through it and it could interact with what was around in the world. It could tell you when you run into somebody you met at a conference who that person was based on facial recognition.
That's right. Internet contact lenses are great because at a cocktail party, you will know exactly who to suck up to at any cocktail party, because your contact lens will identify them, and if they speak Chinese to you, translate from Chinese into English, putting out subtitles below them. And who will be the first to line up to buy these internet contact lenses? College students taking final examinations. They will blink and see all the answers, all the amino acids, all the sines and cosines inside their contact lens. And the next people to buy internet contact lenses will be artists. Artists and architects will wave their hand, and beautiful works of art will emerge because the internet contact lens can take the motions of their fingers and create 3-dimensional plastic representations of what they create. Tourists will love this because tourists will be able to resurrect the entire Roman Empire as they walk through the ruins of Rome. And guess what? The military is putting millions of dollars to perfect this technology. I took a film crew down to Fort Benning, Georgia, and we filmed it. You take a helmet of an ordinary GI, and there's a small eyepiece. You flick it over the person's eye, and immediately the soldier sees the internet of the battlefield. Enemy forces, friendly forces, artillery, jet airplanes, everything laid out right next to your eyeball. I tell you, man, this is big. This is going to change everything as we move to augmented reality.
When you talk about augmented reality, one of the things I was wondering just on the way over here to do this interview, as I was driving down the road, I was imagining what it would be like to drive down the road looking through augmented reality glasses, and I thought, what if I didn't want it? Or what if it gets in the way? Is there a problem with the ethics of changing the way our children start viewing the world, where they're so used to looking through a computer lens that they maybe don't recognize a tree for a tree?
Well, our grandkids will come up to us one day and say, Grandpa, Grandma, how could you possibly live in a world that was dumb? When a chair was just a chair, when a contact lens was just a contact lens, when a table was just a table. Because our grandkids will simply take it for granted that there are chips everywhere. Everywhere and nowhere. In fact, our grandkids won't even use the word computer, just like today, we don't use the word electricity. No one says the word electricity anymore, and yet electricity is everywhere and nowhere, hidden in the walls, the ceiling. We automatically look for the light switch every time we walk into a room. In the future, we will assume that the wallpaper is intelligent, that we have plastic transistors in the wall, and we'll talk to the wall. We'll ask the wall to change color, to change design, to create a video screen, to lock on to our friends so that we can play a bridge game. And if the walls are 360 degrees around you, create the Matrix. The movie The Matrix is not so far-fetched. And if you're a Trekkie and a Star Trek fan, this will be the holodeck. So your living room will be coated with intelligent wallpaper so that you can play any video game, imagine you're anywhere, talk to your friends, teleconference with anybody in the world, and basically act like you're in Star Trek. So you don't have to be in the 24th century. We'll have it perhaps in 10 to 15 years. Intelligent wallpaper.
I want my own personal holodeck.
Yeah,
it's coming. It's coming faster than you realize.
You talk about regenerating organs
yes.
from stem cells. I'm one of the survivors of polio. Will that also apply to developing muscles as well as organs? Can they regenerate?
Yes, even without stem cells, already we can create from your own cells, we can create cartilage, noses, ears, bones, blood, blood vessels, heart valves. The first full bladder was grown 4 years ago. The first windpipe was grown for a woman last year. And in 5 years' time, we'll probably grow the first liver from your own liver cells. So if you're an alcoholic out there, take heart. We may be able to cure alcoholism by simply growing a new liver as livers wear out. And so the human body shop is not so far-fetched. And with stem cells, we should be able to create entire organs like lung tissue, heart tissue that are quite complicated. The previous tissues that I mentioned were created out of sponge. You take plastic sponge and seed it with ordinary cells that then are hit with growth factors. These cells proliferate into the plastic mold, and the plastic is biodegradable, leaving a perfect ear or a perfect nose. But you see, there's a problem there. Blood vessels are very difficult to reproduce. That's where stem cell technology comes in. Because stem cell technology, in principle, can reproduce the entire organ. Now, for mice, there's a video on the internet where you can see a beating mouse heart being grown from scratch. I tell you, man, this is almost biblical. Looking at a mouse heart being grown from nothing, and then it starts to beat. Or seeing a rat with its spinal cord cut, unable to walk, suddenly, after a few months, being able to use all four limbs to walk. This is almost something right out of the Bible, and it's something that we already can do with animals.
There's a lot of research and development and advances that have been made in prosthetic limbs. People coming back from the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq who have lost a leg can get a metal or plastic or a synthetic leg attached, and then they're out skateboarding, skiing, snowboarding. Does that mean that as stem cell research advances, these will become obsolete, or is there a place for a partnership?
It'll be probably a merger specific to the person's injury. If you get a salamander and you rip off an arm or a leg, or there's an accident, the salamander grows back an arm or a leg, right? And how does it do that? Stem cells. That's how salamanders do it. That's how reptiles do it. We can't do it. but we can also tease the stem cells of our own body to create entire organs. Now, with respect to organs now, we can create cochlear implants that give back the sense of hearing to those people who have injury to their eardrum or injury to their nervous system. We can do that. Now with eyesight, we're creating cameras, miniature cameras that can actually receive impulses and shoot it to the optic nerve. Or we can actually put chips right in the retina of an eye, so the eye begins to see a grid of pixels. Eventually, we hope to get maybe 1,000 or so pixels right there inside the retina of an eyeball and restore the sense of sight. So how far can it go? Well, you just extrapolate into the next several decades, and you begin to realize that we might be able to surpass human abilities to create supermen and superwomen, and that one day we'll wake up with a perfect body, perhaps an immortal body, perhaps a body that is super strong. This is well within the realm of possibility, and it's something that's being looked at very seriously now.
How will we deal with information overload? We can put huge quantities of information into computers, but it can almost overwhelm the mind.
Well, yes and no. You realize that most of the internet is junk, and so in the future, wisdom will be prized by people. When you first get on the internet, you're thrilled with all this junk, with all these ideas, bizarre conspiracy theories that you've never heard before. So at first, when you get onto the internet, you get that rush, thinking that, wow, all these conspiracy theories, maybe some of them are correct. However, after a while, you begin to get numb to all this, and then you begin to seek out wisdom. And so in the future, we'll have filters. We'll be able to identify the people we trust, the news that we can depend upon. And so once in a while, yeah, we'll go back into these conspiracy theories and have a wild ride. But then when you want the truth or you want to have wisdom, you'll go back to your trusted people and rely upon that information. And also, let me tell you something historically. When the telephone was first invented decades and decades ago, there were people that argued against the telephone. They said that we're no longer going to have dinner table conversations with our family friends, and we'll spend all our time talking to disembodied voices from the ether. Well, the critics were right. We do spend less time talking to our friends, talking to our loved ones at dinner, and we do talk to these disembodied voices from the ether, and you know something? We love it. Because our circle of acquaintances expanded from maybe 10 to thousands. And now with the internet, children think nothing of playing video games with a kid from Russia, a kid from Australia. They have more in common with somebody in China than they do their next door neighbor. So all this noise is democratizing. That's the point I'm getting. And democracies never war with other democracies. Think of every war you've read about since you were in grade school. They've always been between monarchies and dictatorships, but never between two democracies. So as we have all this noise out there, with it comes democracy, and with it comes the overthrow of dictatorships. Realize that the dictators of the Middle East have been there for half a century. Nothing could budge these dictatorships except Twitter. Who would have thought? Who would have thought that the under 30 crowd would use Facebook and Twitter to overthrow dictatorships that were stable for 50 years? So you're absolutely right. We do live with clutter. We do live with conspiracy theories. We live with noise. But overall, it's worth it.
So when there's only democracies left, are you saying that then we'll have found the cure for war?
No, war is politics by other means, said von Clausewitz, the famous Austrian military theorist. We'll always have political conflicts because there's debates about boundary lines, taxation, who's going to pay for this or that. And so there will be conflicts, and some of that will actually spill over into armed conflict. But major wars will become a thing of the past. We'll have skirmishes, we'll have night raids and vigilantes and stuff like that. But major wars we're simply not going to have as we have more democracies. Or we could have dictatorships like North Korea, where they fear not just the internet, they fear the radio. If you get a radio in North Korea, there's only one frequency on it, and that is the frequency of the Communist Party. And so there may be a few holdouts, dictatorships, that basically strangle all forms of news because they want their people to think that if they're starving, the entire world is starving. So why bother to revolt if everyone is starving? That's why dictatorships want to monopolize the truth. And that's where the internet comes in. In the future, you'll be able to download the internet off your ring, off your contact lens, from satellites in outer space. So it's going to be more and more difficult for even dictatorships like North Korea to keep the internet out.
Wow. Dr. Kaku, we have just a minute or two left, and I was wondering, Bob and I are from Mad Science of Minnesota, which is a group that brings science enrichment into schools and targets elementary school-age children to get them excited about science. And I'm wondering if there's some elementary children out there who are interested in pursuing theoretical physics. What should they be looking at? What should they be reading? Where should they be going to prepare themselves to really have a leg up on the next 20 years?
Well, when I was 8 years old, something happened which changed my life. One thing is that Albert Einstein died. Many people remember the instant when Princess Diana died. Well, for me, it was the time when Einstein died. Everyone was talking about the fact that he could not finish his greatest work. And on the newspaper, they published a picture of his desk with the unfinished work. And so I thought to myself, that's for me. I'm going to help complete that dream of Albert Einstein. So if you're a young kid out there, you have to have inspiration, and it all happens around the age of 10. Before then, it's all mommy and daddy, mommy and daddy. After age 10, you want to know what's out there. How big is the universe anyway? And that's where a telescope, a chemistry kit, a visit to the planetarium can make all the difference. Because that wonderment propels you to become a scientist. And then when you're 16 years of age, it's all over. Because peer pressure sets in, hormones set in, people call you a geek. But you have 6 good years from age 10 to age 16 to be inspired, to have a thrill of a lifetime contemplating the fact that you can understand the nature of physical reality itself. That's a thrill of a lifetime, and it keeps me going every day.
Are we ever going to harness lightning?
Lightning?
There's a huge amount of energy there.
Yeah, but it's raw. It's very uncontrolled, and it's unpredictable. You can't bring it down when you want to. It's like a physicist relying on cosmic rays. Cosmic rays can produce more energy than a particle accelerator, larger than the Large Hadron Collider, but it's unpredictable. You can't control it, and it's very difficult to make measurements or experiments on a reproducible basis. That's why a particle accelerator is preferred over cosmic rays. And that's why lightning bolts are still a black box. We still know very little about lightning bolts as a consequence.
Do you think that the afterlife exists in hyperspace?
Well, 100 years ago, there were some very serious theologians who said that God and spirits must exist in higher dimensions, because then they could be everywhere and nowhere. They could be right in our room, hovering above us. Even H.G. Wells talked about this. H.G. Wells talked about the 4th dimension hovering right above the 3rd dimension, and that's where the invisible man lives. The invisible man is invisible, not because he's a ghost, but because he hovers above us and light goes underneath him. Therefore, he becomes invisible. And in fact, H.G. Wells even wrote a short story where 2 dimensions actually intersect, and an angel falls from one universe into our universe, where a clergyman accidentally shoots them with a shotgun. And so if there are spirits, we have to be careful not to shoot them if they accidentally enter into our dimension. So if beings existed in another dimension, then they would have the power of spirits. That is, they'd be able to walk through walls, they'd be able to disappear, reappear, in the same way that when we look at fish in a pond, we have the power of a ghost. If we look down on a pond, a very shallow pond of fish, we can disappear into the pond, reappear into the pond, grab fish, lift them out, put them back. We would have the power of a ghost, being in the third dimension, looking down on the second dimension. However, from a physics point of view, we believe that even though our world could be 11-dimensional, that's the latest theory, our universe is a 3-dimensional bubble floating in an 11-dimensional ocean, and we're stuck like flies on flypaper, so we cannot leave our 3-dimensional bubble. So there could be other bubbles out there. They would essentially be like a ghost to us. In fact, some people think that dark matter is like a ghost-like substance. Some people think that dark matter is ordinary matter that hovers above us in the fourth spatial dimension. In fact, one of my students has written papers on the subject saying that dark matter would be ordinary matter hovering above us, and it would be invisible like the invisible man. Well, what is that? Something that has mass but is invisible. That's exactly dark matter. And so there is a theory which says that dark matter is ordinary matter hovering above us like a ghost in hyperspace.
You talked about invisible clothing that you could put on and you would not be able to be seen, which would be very nice if you were an army officer out in the field and the enemy wouldn't be able to spot you.
Or a bank robber.
Or a bank robber.
You might want to have a control on it.
Right.
Or a 16-year-old coming home late from a party.
Well,
does
the
this
invisibility cloak is coming faster than you think. We already have perfected it for microwave radiation, but microwave radiation has a large wavelength about the size of your thumb. We want to get it down to the size of a wavelength of light, and that's quite difficult. You have to use nanotechnology. But just like water wraps around you and reforms at the other end, making you invisible to someone downstream, light can also behave like that. We once thought that was impossible. We once thought that the so-called index of refraction was always greater than 1. Now we realize that's wrong. We can actually make the index of refraction less than 1, in fact, even negative, so that light, in fact, can wrap around you, reform at the other end. So Harry Potter would be inside. So think of Harry Potter inside a cylinder. Light hits the cylinder, wraps around the cylinder, reforms at the other end, and Harry Potter is invisible inside the cylinder. Well, guess who's funding this research on metamaterials? The military. They're not stupid. They've spent billions on stealth technology, and stealth bombers are not even invisible. You can see them, for God's sake. Look at Pakistan right now. That was a stealth helicopter. You can see that stealth helicopter. In the future, we might be able to make a stealth helicopter that is truly invisible, but not yet. Nanotechnology is not yet at the stage where we can create metamaterials at will. Right now, we're talking about tiny, tiny microscopic quantities of metamaterials that indeed can make an object invisible if it's microscopic.
Well, Dr. Kaku, it was great to talk with you. Thanks so much for taking some time out of your evening. And I just want to mention at the end that you're coming to us by Skype, which 5 years ago was merely a pipe dream. So if there's anything that says that this can be possible, it's the fact that we're talking with you today. Thank you. It was a real pleasure.
All right. Thank you.